Between 1793 and 1806, 16 children enrolled at a Catholic orphanage in Charleston were quietly removed from its registry without explanation. There were no recorded transfers, no death certificates, no contact with extended families. For years, the absence of these children remained undocumented outside the institution's own ledger. Only when an internal audit in 1807 surfaced missing enrollment numbers did attention begin to shift toward one of the oldest religious-run facilities in early American history. Publicly, St. Vincent's Orphan Asylum was regarded as a model of Catholic charity. Established in colonial-era Charleston to care for children abandoned during epidemics and wars, it held strong ties with city officials and religious leaders. The nuns in charge were respected for their discipline and humility. Weekly mass attendance, handcrafted uniforms, and literacy programs gave the institution a sense of dignity uncommon for the time. Donations flowed steadily from wealthy parishioners who praised St. Vincent's for shielding orphans from poverty. Few suspected the institution of hiding more than just the city's unwanted children. The foundation of St. Vincent's Orphan Asylum had been laid in the late autumn of 1792, 2 blocks inland from Charleston's Eastern Wharf, where the brick roads remained uneven from years of heavy cart traffic. At its inception, the building consisted of a 2-story brick structure with 12 rooms, 6 of which were designated as dormitories. The institution began with 12 children, all left without guardians during the closing stages of the yellow fever crisis. By the spring of 1793, word of its mission had reached both the Catholic diocese and several benefactors along Broad Street. The first endowments, modest though they were, came in the form of food shipments and borrowed furniture. By the end of that same year, the orphanage had doubled in size, both in occupancy and in the number of sisters assigned to its care. The Mother Superior appointed to oversee the asylum was Sister Geneviève Laurier, a Frenchwoman who had arrived in the colonies in 1787 with the intention of establishing religious schools. Described in surviving letters as formal and procedural, she believed that orphans could only be rehabilitated through routine and order. It was under her leadership that St. Vincent's developed its formal intake and exit policies, requiring a full inspection of any child's background and documentation before admission. These procedures, introduced in 1794, impressed local authorities who praised the institution's attention to detail and its effort to reduce dependency on civic almshouses. Much of the record-keeping was handled in a narrow chamber behind the chapel, where ledgers were stored alphabetically on thick cedar shelves. These books listed names, ages, entry dates, and notes about family circumstances. Few details were ever crossed out or amended. The entries for the years 1793 through 1798 showed consistent admissions, with children typically remaining for 4 to 7 years before placement in trade apprenticeships or household service. As per the custom of the time, the goal was not adoption, but integration into the labor system under a sponsoring household. The institution took pride in these placements and often documented the outcomes. By 1799, St. Vincent's had achieved a degree of influence unusual for a religious orphanage in the post-colonial South. Visiting priests from Savannah and New Orleans toured the site and wrote about its cleanliness, the efficiency of its kitchen, and the simplicity of its devotional routines. There was also a clear alignment between the orphanage's operations and local civic initiatives. Several city aldermen had donated to St. Vincent's Library Fund, while one Alderman Cuthbert Haynes offered to supply the institution with building materials for a second wing. Construction began in early 1800 and was completed the following spring. This second wing, which came to be known as the East Quarters, added space for 12 additional girls and 6 boys, along with a new common hall and sewing room. With these additions came new responsibilities and an expanded staff. 2 younger sisters were assigned to manage the domestic routines, while a local widower, Mr. Merrill Downey, was hired as groundskeeper. It was in this period of expansion that discrepancies in oversight began to emerge, although they were not perceived as significant at the time. The orphanage continued to be praised in public correspondence, especially among members of Charleston's growing French-speaking Catholic community. Sister Geneviève remained in correspondence with diocesan officials and published several short writings in the church's Southern Bulletin, on the importance of temperance and structure. These writings, circulated among both religious and civic readers, emphasized clarity of purpose and discipline, encouraging other institutions to adopt similar methods. But as the number of residents increased, so did the complexity of managing them. The East Quarters, though newly built, lacked sufficient insulation and drainage, resulting in frequent maintenance issues. Records from 1802 note persistent mildew in the northern dormitory and a need for replacements of several window frames. Mr. Downey, while diligent in his work, was often called away for outside labor contracts, leaving the sisters to coordinate repairs on their own. Communication between staff became informal. The once detailed daily logs from 1795 and 1796 gradually became more sporadic. A review of the kitchen supply records from 1803 shows long gaps in inventory checks, suggesting a decline in routine documentation. Despite these lapses, St. Vincent's remained outwardly stable. Parish visits continued. Children were seen in neat rows at morning services. Their uniforms, stitched from repurposed muslin and cotton, were always clean. Visitors reported no signs of disarray or disorder. In fact, during an inspection by a visiting archbishop in the summer of 1804, the institution was formally praised for its ability to operate independently from municipal funding. Sister Genevieve accepted the commendation with modesty, noting only that their success came from faith and consistency. Behind the closed door of the record room, however, Sister Elise Marchand, the institution's junior archivist, began to notice minor inconsistencies. These inconsistencies did not at first appear unusual. A child's name would be logged without an entry date. A line would be drawn across 2 columns where a note should have gone. An exit would be marked without a destination. In 1805, she compiled a short list of names for internal correction. These names were not flagged for concern, only for clarification. But over time, she discovered that certain children's records had no matching entries in the meal rosters or disciplinary logs. They had been admitted, but their daily presence was never recorded. In response, she reviewed the congregation's Sunday seating assignments, which had been updated weekly since 1797. These records were typically used to ensure that children rotated pews and did not develop preferred positions. Here again, the same names were missing. 6 children over 2 years showed no pattern of presence despite having clear admission dates. Their names remained in the intake book but did not appear anywhere else. These findings were never reported externally. Instead, Sister Elise documented her findings in a separate notebook and filed it among routine clerical binders in the lower drawer of her desk. Her inquiries, while limited, did not go unnoticed. Sister Genevieve requested that all logbooks be consolidated into a single master ledger beginning in 1806, which would require the destruction of previous duplicates and drafts. This decision was presented as an administrative upgrade designed to reduce clutter and confusion. Sister Elise complied, but not before discreetly copying several pages from the 1802 intake records, noting 4 names that still had no exit documentation. That year, a new external advisor, Reverend Otis Marquand, was appointed to oversee financial correspondence between the diocese and its charitable affiliates. Reverend Marquand, a pragmatic figure from a northern parish, arrived in Charleston with little knowledge of local customs. During his initial review, he noted that the orphanage's numbers appeared inconsistent with the quantities of food and linens ordered monthly. The official number of residents remained constant at 26, but purchases fluctuated significantly. While some discrepancy was expected due to visitors and staff, the variation in supply requests suggested the possibility of unreported reductions or omissions. When he requested clarification, Sister Genevieve explained that certain children had been placed in informal domestic apprenticeships with benefactors who preferred not to be listed publicly. She emphasized that these arrangements were customary and had the approval of long-standing parish supporters. Marquand, unfamiliar with local patronage practices, accepted the explanation and made no further inquiry. By late 1806, however, concern about the orphanage's bookkeeping began to circulate in more formal correspondence. A letter from a Savannah-based priest, Father Jules Renaud, referenced a conversation with a Charleston merchant who claimed to have hosted 2 girls from St. Vincent's without ever receiving documentation. The merchant, who had donated cloth to the orphanage for years, believed the arrangement was temporary and never inquired further. The letter, though speculative, was preserved in the diocesan archive. Within the walls of St. Vincent's, no immediate changes were made. Children continued to attend Mass. Daily prayers were held at the same hour. Deliveries arrived from city vendors and were checked against lists by the senior kitchen assistant. Sister Elise, quietly and without formal directive, continued to maintain her private records. By the end of that year, she had logged 16 names whose files bore no closing entries. The interior of the orphanage, though modest, was maintained with an exacting standard. Floors were scrubbed with vinegar and ash twice weekly, and the long corridor that divided the original dormitories from the east quarters retained the faint scent of lime wash and old paper. At the eastern end, a small cruciform window overlooked the rear vegetable garden, where each child was assigned a weekly task. While most children were between 6 and 12 years of age, those nearing adolescence were often granted supervised access to the cellar, where unused furniture and seasonal supplies were stored. Access to the cellar was managed with a brass key, held at all times by Sister Vivian, the orphanage's quartermaster. During the winter of 1806, the atmosphere at St. Vincent's remained publicly serene. The children continued their studies under the direction of Sister Armande, who instructed in reading and penmanship from a narrow pulpit in the former drawing room. Each lesson began with a passage from the Old Testament, followed by dictation exercises copied onto parchment. While these routines remained unchanged, Sister Elise's concerns over record irregularities continued to expand. Her attempts to resolve the inconsistencies privately led her to examine the annual staff rosters, hoping to identify who might have supervised each undocumented child during their time at the orphanage. These rosters were located in a locked drawer within the main office. Though access to the drawer required permission, Sister Elise was granted use of the office weekly to update prayer attendance logs. In March of that year, she noted an entry marked Transition Caretaking beside the name of a child whose ledger showed no exit date. This designation was not used elsewhere in the records and appeared only once between 1803 and 1806. The term was not defined, and no supplementary remarks had been entered. Following this discovery, Sister Elise requested a meeting with Sister Geneviève under the pretense of verifying liturgical expenses. The meeting, held in the administrative chapel, lasted under 15 minutes. According to notes recorded later in her private notebook, Sister Elise asked generally about changes in procedure for informal apprenticeships. She received only a brief reply, indicating that discretion was necessary for benefactors who preferred confidentiality. The matter, she was told, fell under the supervision of those with authority over external relations. No further clarification was given. 2 weeks after this meeting, Sister Elise was reassigned to oversee textile inventory, a role previously held by Sister Vivienne. While the reassignment was presented as a rotation to ensure skill development, it also placed Elise at greater distance from intake records. Her daily responsibilities shifted to counting bolts of cloth and monitoring the production of uniforms. The workroom, situated in the east quarters, was windowless and narrow with shelving that reached to the ceiling. Within it, she kept a small ledger of materials used, which she continued to annotate privately with observations unrelated to fabric stock. Her records suggest she remained undeterred. In late April, she recorded a discrepancy in the stitching logs. Uniforms were produced in sets, labeled with initials and measurements corresponding to the child assigned. In 3 instances, uniforms had been produced and logged but never issued. The initials matched names she had already flagged in her private list. The uniforms remained folded in the storage bin, unassigned. The tags had not faded. Their stitching was consistent with those completed between late 1804 and early 1805. Meanwhile, external perceptions of the orphanage remained favorable. A printed notice from May 1806 announced that St. Vincent's had received a commemorative gift from a prominent benefactor in the form of 2 wooden benches and a set of painted icons. The gift was presented in a public mass, during which Sister Geneviève gave a brief address thanking the community for their continued support. No mention was made of any administrative changes or pending audits. The ceremony was well attended, with visitors from the Diocesan Council and several families who had sponsored apprenticeships in prior years. Within the institution, however, several procedural modifications took place without formal announcement. Children's chores were restructured into smaller, rotating groups. Access to the East Quarters garden was restricted to alternate days. The rear gate, which opened onto a narrow service alley, was fitted with a new lock. Sister Elise noted that these changes occurred without explanation. She also observed that one of the older children, previously responsible for distributing coal to the upper dormitories, had been reassigned to indoor tasks. No illness or behavioral issue was cited. In early June, Sister Elise located a discarded envelope behind one of the shelving units in the workroom. The paper bore a smudged seal from the Charleston Vestry Committee and was addressed to Sister Vivienne. Though the contents had been removed, a corner fragment remained inside. On it, only a partial phrase was legible. Inquire further if no formal affidavit. The date on the envelope matched the week a child named Louisa R. had been removed from the meal registry, yet her file remained open with no departure recorded. Sister Elise placed the fragment in the back cover of her private ledger and made no mention of it to the other sisters. That summer, the region experienced a brief storm season. Rainfall over the orphanage grounds was persistent but light, and the cisterns filled earlier than expected. During this time, Mr. Downey resumed his maintenance rounds, repairing several gutter joints and resealing the roofline above the common hall. In passing, he noted to Sister Elise that one of the cellar latches had been replaced with an unfamiliar fitting. When asked, he assumed it had been done during his absence and paid it little mind. Sister Elise, however, recalled that the brass key for the cellar had remained in Sister Vivienne's possession, and no work order had been filed for the change. By July, a new visitor arrived, Father Anselm Clay, a young cleric assigned to assist with annual clerical filings for the diocese. His duties were procedural, focused mainly on accounting and public correspondence. However, he expressed an interest in learning more about the daily routines of institutions under diocesan supervision. With approval from Sister Geneviève, he began observing classroom instruction and attending meals. His presence, though limited, provided an opportunity for Sister Elise to speak indirectly about archival practices. She posed her inquiries in hypothetical terms, asking how other diocesan institutions handled ambiguous entries or undocumented placements. Father Clay responded that while informal arrangements were not uncommon, especially in rural parishes, transparency was increasingly encouraged. He noted that recent guidelines recommended formalizing all apprenticeships through notarized letters. When Sister Elise asked if these guidelines were retroactive, he replied that enforcement was not yet consistent, but records should still be maintained for internal clarity. In the days following this exchange, Sister Elise returned to the intake records under the guise of preparing a report on textile needs for incoming residents. Using this pretext, she re-examined the entries from the winter of 1805 and found that 3 names had been removed entirely from the registry. The ink tone on the pages was newer than surrounding text. No visible correction marks appeared. The margins, which often bore small annotations about health or temperament, were blank. These entries had not been crossed out or overwritten. They had been erased and rewritten with different names. She compared these pages with her private notes and found that 2 of the rewritten entries bore identical measurements and initials to uniforms still stored in the bin. Yet the newly listed names did not correspond to any other documents. No meal entries, no seating records, no classroom logs. The children now listed in those spaces did not appear to exist elsewhere in the archive. At the end of August, Sister Elise began composing a memorandum intended for diocesan review. The memorandum was brief, consisting of 7 paragraphs and a final page summarizing the inconsistencies. She did not use the names of the children, opting instead for initials. Her tone was procedural and factual. She avoided any language that implied wrongdoing, focusing instead on gaps in administrative process. She placed the memorandum in a sealed envelope and addressed it to Father Clay, requesting that it be delivered with the month's correspondence bundle. The envelope was never retrieved from her desk. The morning bells at St. Vincent's rang at precisely 5 minutes past 6. Each toll echoed across the gravel courtyard and was followed by the shuffling of slippers on brick floors as the children assembled in lines according to dormitory assignment. The routine had not changed in over a decade. Silence was expected before breakfast, broken only by the call and response of morning prayer. Yet by the autumn of 1806, several small deviations in behavior were beginning to surface among the younger residents. None of these deviations were considered cause for concern on their own, but to the few observant staff who took notice, they indicated a pattern forming quietly beneath the appearance of routine. Children who once performed assigned tasks without question now asked for clarification on simple instructions. One refused to rotate garden duty and requested to remain inside. Two sisters in charge of dormitory care noted that a group of girls from the East Quarters began waking earlier than required, dressing fully before the morning bell. When questioned, they claimed they had misheard the chime. These instances, recorded only in the personal logs of junior caretakers, were not seen as disciplinary infractions, but they revealed a subtle change in the tone of daily life. Sister Armande, who led instruction in reading and numbers, noted a different irregularity. One child, whom she identified by her middle initial only, began withholding completed assignments without explanation. Her quill marks stopped abruptly midway through sentences. On several occasions she turned in blank pages. When prompted to read aloud, she appeared distracted and looked repeatedly toward the rear of the classroom. This behavior continued for several weeks before it ceased altogether. No further mention of it was made in the classroom log. The internal silence surrounding these observations was partly due to the institution's hierarchical structure. Junior staff were encouraged to report procedural failures, but subjective impressions were often dismissed as distractions. Any commentary not grounded in observable performance metrics, such as attendance, hygiene, or scholastic output, was regarded as speculative. This policy, instituted by Sister Genevieve in the early 1800s, was intended to maintain objectivity. It also discouraged the escalation of unconfirmed concerns. During this same period, Sister Elise, still assigned to the textile workroom, continued to maintain a private index of uniform distribution. Her annotations indicated that 2 uniform sets completed in late September had been logged as issued, yet no initials were assigned. These sets remained unclaimed on the shelf for over 3 weeks. No requisition tags were filed. When she inquired with the sister in charge of new admissions, she was told that no new residents had arrived since midsummer. The discrepancy was left unresolved. In early October, Father Clay returned to St. Vincent's with a sealed envelope bearing the diocesan seal. His visit was brief and procedural. He requested receipts for the month's bread and grain deliveries and conducted a short inventory of chapel supplies. Sister Genevieve greeted him formally and remained present throughout his inspection. According to the summary later archived in the diocesan ledger, he found no irregularities. Before departing, he asked after Sister Elise, mentioning he had expected correspondence from her during the previous month's clerical exchange. Sister Genevieve stated that she had reassigned the sister to internal affairs and that any communications would now come through her office. Sister Elise, unaware of this exchange at the time, continued to compile a timeline of enrollment patterns, focusing on years where dormitory populations had decreased without corresponding documentation. Her notes showed that between 1802 and 1806, the total number of children listed in weekly service seating dropped in 4 separate intervals, each lasting 3 to 6 weeks. Each drop corresponded to an unrecorded entry or unissued uniform. The children in question never appeared in departure logs or work placements. Her notes, which she no longer attempted to submit through official channels, now included dates and initials, but no conclusions. Elsewhere within the institution, routines persisted as expected. The kitchen, under the supervision of Sister Marcel, continued preparing daily meals with strict adherence to portion guidelines. Donations from local patrons were still received monthly and recorded in the household ledger. Deliveries of winter cloth, dry oats, and lamp oil arrived as scheduled. Visitors remained few, but those who did attend reported nothing out of the ordinary. The children, though quieter than in previous years, showed no signs of visible distress or disruption. To most observers, the orphanage appeared to be in stable and uninterrupted operation. It was during this window of apparent calm that a traveling bookkeeper named Felix Garrison, employed by a shipping firm out of Wilmington, visited the institution on behalf of a merchant donor. Garrison's task was to verify that the goods supplied by his client, a shipment of dried beans and apples, had been received and properly stored. He was provided access to the storage room adjacent to the kitchen and logged the weights and box markings without incident. Before leaving, he requested to view the inventory books for the prior quarter. He was escorted by Sister Marcel to the administrative office, where the books were kept under lock. During the inspection, Garrison observed a notation that confused him. A food requisition from August had been billed for 28 children, though the number officially recorded as residing at the orphanage in diocesan correspondence was 22. When he asked for clarification, Sister Marcel stated that temporary boarders sometimes passed through during summer months and that records had not yet been updated. Garrison noted the discrepancy in his report, but it was not forwarded to any external body. Later that week, an older girl in the East Quarters was overheard by the dormitory monitor, referring to a name unfamiliar to the roster. When questioned, she stated the name was of a child who had recently left for placement. Yet no such departure had been documented. The monitor, Sister Henriette, reported the incident informally to her supervising sister, who advised her not to pursue the matter further, as confusion among children regarding names and departures was not uncommon. In mid-November, a second visitor arrived. This time it was a minor clerical auditor from the diocesan archive conducting a random spot check of affiliated institutions. The auditor, a Mr. Nathaniel Cross, was a meticulous individual with a reputation for exactitude. He spent 3 hours at St. Vincent's reviewing enrollment and departure logs. His notes, later stored in the diocesan office, made mention of several minor irregularities. In particular, he found that a sequence of entries from 1804 contained identical phrasing across multiple pages, suggesting they had been transcribed from another source rather than recorded in real time. Mr. Cross submitted a quiet recommendation that the orphanage review its procedures for maintaining original logbooks. No penalties or formal reports were issued, but the visit prompted a quiet response within the institution. The administrative office initiated a review of the existing archival system. Several older ledgers were relocated to a locked cabinet in the chapel vestry. Junior staff were instructed to cease maintaining duplicate notebooks, and all annotations were to be approved by a senior sister before being stored. This shift, while presented as a standardization effort, further reduced the amount of internal cross-checking among the lower ranks. Sister Elise, now confined to textile oversight without access to enrollment records, began discreetly reconstructing timelines based on meal preparation notes and sewing requests. These secondary records, though less detailed, allowed her to track patterns indirectly. She noticed that on 4 occasions, meal counts dropped temporarily before returning to their previous levels, without corresponding entries in other areas of documentation. These lapses, averaging 2 to 3 days in duration, had occurred in 1803, 1804, 1805, and again in late 1806. No explanation was ever formally given. By the end of that year, her private index contained 16 entries matching children, whose records showed open admissions but no traceable exits. Throughout the final months of 1806, a renewed emphasis on external perception became evident at St. Vincent's. Decorative wreaths were placed in the chapel before the feast days, and children were assigned scripted phrases to recite during the visits of minor clergy. A seamstress from the neighboring parish was brought in temporarily to repair altar linens and advise on uniform modifications. Meanwhile, Sister Genevieve arranged for several benefactors to tour the grounds, guiding them along predetermined paths that avoided the East Quarters entirely. The tours were brief, no more than 20 minutes, and included a short display of recitations from the older children. One of the visitors, a sugar broker's widow from Queen Street, later remarked that the orphanage reminded her of a convent she had once seen in Calais, neat and serene, but oddly quiet. She mentioned it in passing during a luncheon attended by several clergy wives. Her comment did not circulate beyond that table, but it marked one of the first external observations that deviated from the usual praise. Inside the institution, internal communication between staff had become increasingly formal. Any request for access to archival records or material storage required written permission. Common room gatherings among the sisters were shortened, and mealtimes were now divided into 2 rotations to limit congregation. These adjustments were presented as necessary for the upcoming inventory season, but they had the effect of isolating junior staff from one another. Few questioned the changes directly, as administrative decisions were rarely discussed outside of official assignments. Sister Elise, though restricted in her duties, continued to maintain her textile reports in a parallel format. She used a separate booklet, hidden in a compartment beneath the lowest fabric shelf, to match fabric consumption rates with the issued requisitions. The booklet was kept unbound, so pages could be reordered without detection. She worked late into the evenings, citing delays in counting or repairs as justification for staying in the workroom after curfew. By early December, her records contained complete lists of names, initials, uniform sizes, and date ranges for each case she considered unresolved. Her most recent addition was a boy whose name had appeared briefly in a November delivery roster for shoes. His initials matched an earlier textile label from midsummer, but no exit had been documented. His file was absent from the shelf, and when she inquired indirectly about the shoe size, she was told it had been a mistaken entry and should be disregarded. The shoes had been returned to the vendor, according to the response. No receipt for the return was included in the supply records. At the same time, a quiet administrative shift occurred. Sister Vivian, who had overseen grounds and storeroom access, was reassigned to a remote parish school outside Charleston. Her departure was noted in the chapel bulletin but not explained. Her replacement, Sister Colette, arrived with limited background and no previous affiliation with the orphanage. She was immediately tasked with overseeing cellar access and conducting weekly checks of the storage areas. While friendly in demeanor, she adhered strictly to written protocol and declined to discuss procedural history. She had been instructed, she said, to enforce existing policy and refer questions to the superior. This change meant that Sister Elise no longer had any allies with knowledge of the older intake systems. Sister Colette kept the keys in a steel box inside the chapel vestry and opened storage areas only on designated days. Elise made no attempt to re-establish access. Instead, she focused on completing the final section of her private report, which she now intended to submit not through internal channels, but via a third party. She had begun composing a letter addressed to an acquaintance from the seminary offices in Savannah, someone she believed might know how to forward materials discreetly to diocesan oversight without filtering through Charleston's clergy. The letter was brief, referencing an ongoing concern regarding administrative inconsistencies at a diocesan institution. She did not mention St. Vincent's by name, but included a folded list of initials and corresponding intake dates with an enclosed request for procedural clarification. She affixed no return address. Her intention was to send the packet by hand through a local trader scheduled to leave Charleston before the turn of the year. The trader, however, cancelled his departure due to seasonal flooding on the main route south. The packet remained with her, sealed and stored beneath the flooring boards in the workroom's corner storage crate. She did not attempt to resend it. Meanwhile, the institution prepared for the annual nativity procession. Each child was assigned a role, and rehearsals were held in the main hall every afternoon. Attendance was mandatory. The procession, which involved reciting biblical passages and walking in sequence before parish guests, had been part of St. Vincent's tradition since its early years. However, that December, 2 of the children originally assigned speaking roles were abruptly removed from the schedule. Their replacements were chosen from the younger dormitories. No reason was given, and the substitutions were made without fanfare. Sister Elise, seated in the back during rehearsals, noticed that the original scripts had been discarded and replaced with new copies bearing slightly altered text. The names of the children had been removed from the margins and replaced with initials. When she asked for an older version of the program to confirm measurements for costumes, she was told those drafts had been misplaced. On the evening of the procession, the chapel filled with guests. The children entered in pairs, holding candles and reciting from memory. The event passed without interruption. Photographs were not yet common, but a local portrait sketcher was hired to record the lineup for the parish bulletin. In the days following the event, Sister Elise resumed her textile duties without comment. She continued to monitor material usage, noting that a bolt of wool reserved for additional cloaks remained untouched despite having been marked as distributed. The discrepancy was minor and no correction was filed. After New Year's, a delivery arrived from the diocesan warehouse, a shipment of writing supplies, candles, and replacement parchment for the intake books. Included in the shipment was a directive requesting updated formatting of enrollment records in line with new archiving standards. The directive was signed by the diocesan registrar and included instructions for consolidating entries from previous years into a new volume. All prior ledgers, the directive stated, were to be retired and stored indefinitely. Sister Genevieve announced the implementation of these changes during a staff briefing held in the Common Hall. The transition would begin immediately. Staff were asked to assist in transferring the contents of older books into the new format, working under supervision. Access to original volumes would be limited, and copies would be reviewed before entry. Sister Elise, when informed of her role in the transcription, requested to be reassigned to fabric management during the transition. Her request was approved. She spent the following weeks finalizing her private records and transferred their contents into a narrow stitched folio, which she labeled only with dates and category headings. She did not include conclusions, only observations. By late January, her folio was complete. She placed it inside a cloth bag stitched into the lining of her trunk. She made no further effort to submit it. The new year at St. Vincent's began with few external disruptions. Rainfall across Charleston's lower wards remained light, and the city's civic reports for January 1807 reflected stable conditions. Within the orphanage walls, the clerical staff worked to reorganize archival materials according to the revised diocesan directive. This process, expected to last several weeks, required copying original enrollment entries into a consolidated ledger using standardized language and updated format guidelines. Each entry included the child's name, estimated age at admission, dates of residence, and, if applicable, notes regarding placement or departure. The language was to be neutral and free of interpretation. Sister Colette supervised the transcription. Her instructions were to verify that each rewritten entry corresponded to a visible original, and to document any omissions or gaps. A second sister, usually drawn from the teaching or textile staff, assisted by locating pages, preparing ink supplies, and ensuring that all margins met alignment standards. The tone of the task was clerical rather than investigative, and it was treated as an administrative duty. Staff were discouraged from interpreting discrepancies unless directly instructed. Despite her earlier involvement in record-keeping, Sister Elise remained in the textile area, where she resumed her duties preparing spring uniforms and tracking supply needs. Though she was not involved in the transcription process, she remained aware of its progress through casual remarks shared during evening prayers. She learned indirectly that 3 of the older ledgers had been flagged for incomplete data. In each case, the issue stemmed from a cluster of entries missing final notations. Sister Colette had marked these pages with linen bookmarks, but did not remove them from circulation. No external report was generated. Outside the administrative rooms, the children resumed lessons after Epiphany. Indoor routines remained unchanged, though weather conditions restricted garden duties and recreation. Sister Armande, still responsible for instruction, shortened classroom hours to account for seasonal fatigue. Afternoon sessions were replaced with quiet reading in the dormitory halls. During one of these sessions, a younger girl was observed tracing a name into her slate, repeating the motion without prompting. When asked, she replied that the name had been taught to her by another resident, though she could not identify which one. The name did not appear in the current roster. This incident, like others before it, was not formally reported. It was entered only into the classroom logbook, with a neutral description and no follow-up. Sister Armande later crossed out the entry and replaced it with a standard notation for behavior review. She did not revisit the detail. By mid-February, the transcription project entered its final phase. The consolidated ledger, bound in calfskin and measuring nearly 3 inches thick, was to become the new institutional masterbook. Sister Colette scheduled an internal review to ensure that all prior ledgers had been properly copied and that any missing entries were noted in the appendix. During this review, she observed that one intake record from 1804 had been entirely omitted. The corresponding name, previously located in the original ledger, no longer appeared. A second staff member confirmed the omission and traced the page in question. The ink on the original entry appeared to have been overwritten. The discovery was logged quietly in a margin note, and the entry was reconstructed from memory. The reconstruction used approximate data, marked with the word undated. This decision followed diocesan guidelines for cases where documentation could not be verified. No explanation was recorded for the loss of the original data. In the following days, 2 additional entries from the same year were marked with similar notations. These cases shared characteristics with those previously reviewed by Sister Elise, including the absence of placement documentation and inconsistencies in classroom attendance records. The findings were discussed briefly during an internal meeting held in the vestry, attended only by Sister Colette and the 3 sisters assigned to transcription. No junior staff were invited. The meeting concluded with a directive to proceed using best available knowledge, and no further notes were entered into the official logs. Elsewhere in the orphanage, Sister Elise had begun revisiting her fabric inventories for the prior 3 years. Her aim was to prepare a comparative report showing seasonal consumption patterns, which could be used to project future orders. In doing so, she noticed a consistent shortfall in wool usage during spring months compared to ordered quantities. The discrepancy, though modest, amounted to 3 or 4 full uniforms each year. These were not reflected in issued inventory sheets and could not be traced to donations or emergency replacements. She noted the figures in a side column but did not submit a formal report. On the second Tuesday of Lent, a package arrived from the diocesan print office. Inside were 2 booklets outlining new archiving protocols, along with a printed directive regarding the treatment of unresolved entries. Institutions were encouraged to label such cases as transferred, unless clear evidence of placement or exit could be produced. The term transferred would apply to children whose names appeared in records but could not be confirmed in later documentation. The rationale, according to the booklet, was to reduce speculation and maintain clerical neutrality. This language, though officially sanctioned, further complicated efforts to distinguish between legitimate placements and ambiguous removals. Sister Colette reviewed the directive with Sister Geneviève and issued an internal memorandum stating that all future omissions would be handled according to the transfer designation. The memorandum did not invite discussion. Staff were instructed to avoid speculation when updating old entries. By early March, preparations for the spring audit were underway. This included verifying dormitory counts, confirming chore rosters, and updating placement charts. The audit, conducted annually by a diocesan visitor, was meant to ensure compliance with care standards and procedural guidelines. The visitor, Reverend Edwin Stokes, had served in this role for 3 years and was known for brief but thorough inspections. Upon arrival, he met with Sister Geneviève and was given a tour of the facility. He reviewed the new consolidated ledger, skimmed several meal logs, and observed a classroom session. During his visit to the East Quarters, he requested to view the cellar, citing a prior note from the maintenance log regarding drainage repairs. Sister Colette unlocked the cellar door and provided a short explanation of its use. Reverend Stokes made no observations and declined to enter, stating only that he was satisfied with the explanation. His final report, submitted to the diocesan office 2 weeks later, noted that St. Vincent's remained in good operational standing. He praised the institution's record-keeping improvements and described the atmosphere as orderly and well-managed. No further inspection was scheduled for that year. 3 days after the audit, a new intake arrived, a girl of approximately 7 years brought by a family acquaintance after the death of her grandmother. Her documentation was incomplete, consisting only of a handwritten letter and a folded baptismal certificate. She was given a temporary uniform and assigned to the lower dormitory. Sister Elise, tasked with resizing a cloak for the new arrival, noted that the girl responded only to a shortened version of her middle name. Her full name did not appear in the intake log for another 4 days. When the name was finally entered, it was placed 2 lines below the prior entry, leaving a space blank in between. The blank line bore no notation and no correction was entered. This entry, though minor in appearance, mirrored the format used in 3 earlier intake ledgers, reviewed by Sister Elise during her prior record work. By the end of March, her folio, still stored in the lining of her trunk, remained untouched. Chapter 3. Part 1 completed April arrived with unseasonably dry conditions, allowing for minor repairs on the orphanage grounds. Mr. Downey returned to part-time service, patched the outer fencing and cleared the path to the rear gate, which had remained closed since autumn. The gate, which opened toward a narrow access lane behind the east quarters, was fitted with a new padlock. According to the maintenance log, the upgrade was requested for security and integrity during supply deliveries. No change was made to the gate's schedule of use, which remained restricted to deliveries supervised by senior staff. Inside, the atmosphere at St. Vincent's grew increasingly procedural. Morning routines continued unchanged, but staff interactions took on a measured formality. Notices were issued through folded slips left in chapel boxes. Verbal instructions were replaced with copied directives. Meetings were held only in the vestry or administrative chamber, and attendance was recorded. In this environment, discretion became habit. No questions were posed publicly, and junior staff refrained from requesting record access unless assigned. Sister Elise adapted by narrowing her focus. Her textile duties expanded slightly with the introduction of new linen bolts, and she used the opportunity to inventory surplus materials stored in the second-floor closets. These inventories, though ostensibly routine, allowed her to cross-reference usage rates with clothing assignments logged during the spring rotation. She noted that 3 sizes commonly issued during the previous year had not been requested in recent months. These sizes, corresponding to children aged 6 to 8, showed a gap of 4 requisitions compared to prior seasonal averages. No explanation was recorded in the official charts. That same month, a visiting cleric from the Savannah parish made a brief stop at St. Vincent's during his return journey from Wilmington. His name was Father Lionel Kearney, and he had previously overseen a smaller institution affiliated with the diocese. His presence at the orphanage was informal, prompted by interest in the updated ledger system. He remained on site for just under 4 hours, reviewing procedural materials and exchanging pleasantries with Sister Genevieve. During his stay, he requested to observe dormitory routines and made a short walk through the garden plot behind the east quarters. During this walk, Father Kearney commented on the arrangement of the plot beds, which appeared underused for the season. He asked whether the children had been reassigned to indoor chores. Sister Colette responded that garden assignments rotated according to academic scheduling. No further inquiry followed. Before departing, Father Kearney left a signed note commending the staff for their ongoing adherence to structure and restraint, a phrase he had used in several prior institutional reports. Shortly after his visit, a directive was issued internally to review the orphanage's annual transfer records. The review, explained as part of diocesan standardization efforts, required a written summary of all children transferred between 1803 and 1806. The task was assigned to Sister Colette and 2 assistants. The summary would include names, dates of departure, reason for transfer, and receiving institution or household. In cases where no receiving party was documented, the directive permitted the use of general terms such as parish relocation or benefactor placement. The summary process lasted 6 days. During this time, the archival room was restricted to senior staff only. At the end of the review, a bound appendix was created and affixed to the new master ledger. The appendix contained 37 names. Of those, 16 listed the transfer destination as undisclosed. Each of the 16 entries was accompanied by a note stating that the receiving party had requested confidentiality. The language used in each note was nearly identical. Although Sister Elise was not involved in the review, she obtained a copy of the appendix index page, through one of the linen folding slips discarded during the transcription process. The page contained only initials and dates. Upon comparing these to her private folio, she found that 14 of the 16 matched the entries she had compiled over the past 3 years. The 2 remaining names were unfamiliar, but fell within the same date range and age bracket. She added both to her list, bringing the total to 18. In late April, a fire inspection was conducted by a municipal officer whose responsibilities included evaluating chimney clearance and lantern usage. The officer, a local tradesman deputized for spring inspections, spent 25 minutes on the property. His report noted no violations, but suggested replacing 2 rusted stovepipe fittings before midsummer. The recommendation was received without objection and scheduled for the following week. His visit was recorded in the maintenance log and marked with a green ribbon in the vestry calendar. Shortly afterward, a replacement batch of uniforms arrived from the Diocesan Sewing Guild. The batch included sets in sizes not currently assigned to any listed residents. When asked about the discrepancy, the courier explained that the shipment was based on previous seasonal orders and not updated for current occupancy. Sister Elise was tasked with organizing the inventory. Upon inspecting the contents, she found 3 cloaks bearing hand-stitched initials matching children no longer present. She folded these cloaks into storage without annotation and noted the initials in her folio margin. May arrived with a brief storm that caused minor flooding along the street behind the east quarters. The rear garden was submerged for 2 days. Staff were instructed to restrict access and relocate any exposed materials. During this interval, the back cellar remained locked. Deliveries were rerouted to the front entry, and a notice was posted instructing drivers to avoid the eastern lane. No record was made of damage to the grounds. The week following the storm, Sister Elise was called to assist in the chapel for an upcoming feast day preparation. Her duties included polishing candle holders and mending altar cloths. While in the vestry, she observed a stack of intake index cards being sorted for review. She was not permitted to handle the cards, but she noted that several bore identical script and ink flow, suggesting they had been written in sequence rather than during separate admissions. This method of batch entry, though not uncommon, was discouraged by the new diocesan guidelines. One card, visible near the top of the stack, included a note stating, "Entered as of registry date, details pending." The child's name listed was partially obscured, but the initials corresponded with a previously noted uniform order from early 1805. Sister Elise made no remark at the time and returned to her assigned duties. By the end of the month, a visiting steward from the Diocesan Finance Committee arrived to verify endowment allocations. His inspection was strictly financial and did not include access to residential or academic records. He reviewed expense ledgers, spoke briefly with the kitchen staff, and noted a discrepancy between linen purchases and recorded usage. The discrepancy, estimated at 6 bolts, was attributed to damaged materials discarded after the storm. No further questions were raised, and the steward's report was marked "Account settled." Sister Elise updated her fabric records accordingly, noting the unexplained shortfall. Her folio now included annotations from 10 separate ledgers and correspondence logs, cross-indexed by date and material flow. The entries were numbered but not named. In total, she had recorded 21 cases for which either intake or exit could not be substantiated. She filed the folio back into the lining of her trunk and stitched the opening shut. On the first Monday of June, a girl from the East Quarters failed to report to the morning garden rotation. When asked, her dormitory monitor said the girl had been reassigned to indoor chores for the week. No written order accompanied the change. Her absence was not reflected in the day's seating chart, and her name remained on the meal roster. The following morning, the monitor confirmed that the girl had resumed her prior schedule. No explanation was offered. Summer began with an unexpected quiet at St. Vincent's. Morning attendance remained consistent, and the courtyard, cleared of storm debris, reopened for chore rotations. The East Quarters resumed full schedule. Deliveries of dried provisions and uniform fabrics continued without delay. Official correspondence with the diocesan office remained regular and without irregularity. Yet within the orphanage walls, There were indications that the previous months had left a subtle, permanent effect on the institution's internal dynamics. Several junior sisters were reassigned to other roles across the diocese, beginning with Sister Marcel, whose duties in the kitchen were taken over by a younger assistant from a neighboring parish. Sister Armanda, responsible for instruction, received a new teaching assistant with limited experience in record-keeping. Staff transitions were explained as part of seasonal restructuring. The children, as always, adapted without comment. Classroom lessons resumed with adjusted assignments. Morning prayers were shortened to accommodate the warmer weather. Outside observers, had they visited, would have found no basis for concern. Internally, however, knowledge of administrative changes filtered slowly among the staff. The departure of Sister Colette, announced abruptly in late June, was followed by a series of document transfers to the diocesan archive. Her replacement, Sister Marguerite, arrived from a facility outside Colombia. Unlike her predecessor, she did not conduct an immediate review of existing ledgers. Instead, she relied on the consolidated volume and deferred all inquiries to the superior. When questioned about missing entries, she explained that only documents marked current required verification. All else had been archived by directive. The term archived began appearing frequently in notices, replacing retained or on file. One directive stated that references to children not appearing in the consolidated volume should no longer be cited in daily logs. New intake entries were to be entered only after a second confirmation by senior staff. Departure notices would use pre-approved phrasing. These measures, though not officially labelled as policy, were understood as final. Sister Elise, now the longest-serving member of the textile staff, found her duties confined almost entirely to material preparation. Her previous authority over requisitions had been reduced. She no longer received direct copies of measurement slips or seating updates. Uniforms were now distributed by assigned monitors. Her request to inventory the East Quarter's linen stock was declined, with the explanation that it would be handled internally. She did not contest the decision. Instead, she re-examined the material ledgers from the previous year and isolated 3 entries marked emergency replacement. These had no corresponding damage reports. The uniforms listed as replaced remained in storage. Their condition was intact. She removed the pages containing these entries and placed them with the remaining portion of her folio, which now included cross-referenced dates, sizes, and initials matching known departures. In early July, a letter arrived from the diocesan registrar requesting that St. Vincent's prepare a formal summary of all non-standard placements since 1805. The letter was dated 2 weeks earlier and bore the seal of the Charleston Ecclesiastic Office. The request did not cite cause, but it asked that the response be submitted within 6 weeks. Sister Genevieve assigned the task to herself, assisted by a part-time clerk from the cathedral office. No internal discussion accompanied the process. The summary was compiled over a period of 10 days. According to the internal dispatch note, the final report included 17 cases. Of these, 13 were listed under benefactor transfer, 3 under temporary placement, and 1 under relocation due to medical need. No names appeared on the internal copy retained by staff. The report was marked complete and sealed in a manila envelope. A visiting courier dispatched it to the registrar's office on July 19th. 2 days later, a diocesan official arrived without prior notice. He identified himself as Brother Alden, administrative assistant to the senior archive supervisor. His stated purpose was to conduct a follow-up interview on the recently submitted placement summary. He requested access to the consolidated volume and any corresponding intake logs. Sister Genevieve complied. She granted him access to the office during off hours and directed him to the bound appendix. Brother Alden remained on site for 3 days. His review focused exclusively on children listed as transferred or undisclosed. He did not request interviews with staff or residents. On his final day, he met privately with Sister Genevieve for just under an hour. Afterward, he declined an offer of dinner and left before Vespers. His departure was not recorded in the chapel bulletin. That week, the children's dormitory rosters were reprinted. The new versions, posted outside each hallway, contained no initials, only numbers. Children were assigned new sleeping positions based on age group rather than enrollment date. No explanation was given. When Sister Elise asked to view the old rosters, she was told they had been collected and filed. The filing cabinet in which they were stored had been relocated to the administrative storage room, a space now restricted to 2 designated personnel. The change coincided with the arrival of 2 novices from St. Helena Parish, who were placed on trial rotation in the laundry and kitchen. Their presence was described as temporary and developmental. However, their duties included assisting with uniform tagging and supply checks, areas previously assigned to senior textile staff. One of the novices, Sister May, was observed checking names against a list that did not correspond to the current dormitory numbers. When asked what the list contained, she responded that it was an internal assignment log. No further detail was provided. By late July, several procedural changes were visible to the children. Afternoon instruction was now separated by gender, and seating in the chapel alternated weekly by age group. Dormitory inspections increased in frequency. Outdoor time was reduced to 20 minutes per day. The garden plot remained uncultivated, despite new tools having been delivered in June. One evening, while reviewing sewing patterns for autumn uniforms, Sister Elise discovered that one of the older uniform tags had been removed and replaced. The stitching was newer, and the replacement tag bore the same initials, but with reversed placement. This small change, though easily overlooked, confirmed that archival entries were being amended retroactively. She returned the garment to its shelf and updated her folio with a brief note. Re-entry suspected, name format altered, original tag no longer traceable. On the first Sunday of August, a letter arrived from a Savannah-based parish requesting confirmation of a prior placement. The letter, addressed to the administrative office, asked whether a child by the name of M.R., previously housed at St. Vincent's, had been placed with a merchant family in 1806. No such placement appeared in the current ledger. The name did not match any listed under the official appendix. The response, drafted by Sister Geneviève, stated that the record could not be located and that the placement likely occurred through an informal arrangement. No copy of the outgoing letter was stored in the communication log. By mid-August, an unspoken consensus had formed among the long-serving staff at St. Vincent's. Certain questions were no longer asked. Uniform distributions were accepted as final, regardless of irregularities. Enrollment lists were viewed as static, even when revisions were quietly introduced. Children were not questioned about those who no longer appeared in the dormitories. Conversation during meal preparation turned to mundane matters: delivery delays, summer heat, the condition of the chapel drapery. Administrative silence became a form of policy. The consolidated ledger, now treated as the sole source of institutional truth, had not been updated publicly since June. Sister Marguerite, the newly assigned record supervisor, maintained her entries in a locked compartment in the vestry. Only Sister Geneviève held the second key. Requests for updates were redirected to the Superior's office, where explanations were provided in general terms. Staff were advised to trust that the master volume reflected the current operational reality. Sister Elise continued her textile assignments without interruption. Her folio, though complete, remained sealed and hidden. She no longer cross-referenced entries aloud. The time for verification had passed. Instead, she limited herself to recording material inflows and irregular substitutions. Her sewing table, once surrounded by children waiting for adjustments or repairs, now sat beside the storeroom, where only tagged garments were collected and returned. She was no longer included in the preparation of uniform rosters. In early September, a minor illness circulated among the younger dormitory residents. Several children were excused from chores and held from classroom attendance for 5 days. During this period, meal portions were adjusted and dormitory inspections increased. The temporary infirmary space near the East Quarters was used under supervision by Sister May. No visitors were permitted during this interval. By the following week, all affected children returned to routine activities. No permanent changes to dormitory placement were recorded. Shortly afterward, an internal notice was posted advising staff that archival requests would now be submitted through a standardized form. The form required a stated purpose, approval signature, and notation of whether the requested record related to current or retired residents. The language of the form matched that found in diocesan procedural bulletins issued for use in civic institutions. It contained no field for narrative explanation. Staff were instructed to retain only their assigned copy. Duplicates would be discarded after use. At the same time, a structural review of the East Quarters was conducted by a contracted maintenance surveyor. His task was to evaluate the condition of the eastern exterior, cellar supports and drainage outlets. He arrived on September 14th and remained for 3 hours. His findings, logged in the diocesan maintenance register, indicated no significant concerns. He recommended additional reinforcement of one window lintel and the repointing of several bricks near the foundation. No reference was made to the interior. Later that week, Sister Elise received a sewing request for 3 cloaks labeled with initials she did not recognize. The note attached to the request was unsigned. When she inquired with the quartermaster, she was informed that the request had been forwarded from the administrative office. She completed the assignment and recorded the material usage under early autumn requisitions. The garments were collected the following morning. She did not ask who they were assigned to. On September 27th, a parcel arrived addressed to Sister Genevieve from the Diocesan Legal Office. It contained a set of updated forms for internal placement agreements and a sealed memorandum referencing earlier correspondence. According to the dispatch log, the parcel was signed for and delivered to the Superior's office. Its contents were not distributed to staff. No immediate changes to protocol followed. At the start of October, Sister Elise began compiling her final textile ledger for the year. It included material consumption totals, projected shortages, and a draft requisition form for the winter season. While reviewing the figures from July through September, she discovered that several uniform sizes had been reordered without explanation. The surplus, amounting to 4 full sets, was not reflected in the distribution log. No return slips were filed, and no donor notes explained the additions. She added the entries to the margin of her personal folio, but made no further copies. Her documentation now covered the full duration of the noted discrepancies, from the earliest entry in 1803 to the present. In total, 23 cases remained unverified. None had been acknowledged publicly. She did not intend to revise the list further. 2 weeks later, a diocesan circular was posted in the chapel, advising all affiliated institutions that external audits for the upcoming year would be suspended due to administrative restructuring. Regular correspondence and reports would continue through standard channels, but no in-person visits would occur before the next fiscal cycle. The announcement was brief and without elaboration. It was signed by the assistant to the senior registrar and dated October 11th. The following day, Sister Elise submitted her final requisition form, listing estimated fabric needs for winter. She handed it to a courier who departed for the cathedral office without delay. The requisition included no annotations, discrepancies, or special requests. It was accepted and logged without comment. In the final week of October, a light rain settled over Charleston. The courtyard at St. Vincent's remained closed for 3 days. Children studied indoors. Deliveries were received under the covered gate. On the last morning of the month, a new child was added to the seating chart. Her initials LD appeared handwritten in the corner of the roster. She was not introduced to the staff during the morning meeting. No uniform measurement was requested. No entry appeared in the visible ledger. Her name was added without a date. If this story impacted you, if you stayed until the end, it's because you feel these hidden truths also need to be exposed. So leave in the comments the city you're watching from. This way we can see how far these stories are reaching. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering. Subscribe to our channel and tell us which of these stories you had heard of. This story was based on historical records, obtained through meticulous research. The real names were preserved,